did I miss anyone? Okay, so you hear that there's a broad background of expertise in people that have been in cattle production or other ruminant production for a while, and others that are very new. Students, UK specialists, NRCS specialists. So we're all here to learn. And in fact, if you've got some specific questions on your farm that you've been wondering about, maybe you're embarrassed to go to your county agent or go to the specialist, you've got us here for 2 days. You've got us here, specialists as NRCS. If you want to know more how to encourage wildlife on your farm, we got some wildlife specialists. Or if you want to know how to discourage wildlife on your farm, you could probably ask them that as well. So thank you. Chris, any other housekeeping? Okay, and I don't want to forget the dedication. Chris, will you video this? Donna couldn't be here, so she asked. So the front page of your notebook, we've got a, well, let me stop because the recipient's not here, so she asked to send the video. Tell me when you're ready, Chris. Okay, we want to dedicate this 2023 grazing school to Dr. Donna Emerald Phillips. Donna was one of the originators of this grazing school back in 1996. She's an extension specialist, or was until she retired a few weeks ago, in dairy science, but very broad background, very broad expertise. She taught at the grazing school, like I say, twice a year for all of these years. So we just really appreciate what Donna did to get this started, what she's done to teach over time. And Donna's been given a number of awards. For example, the Southern Honor Award through the ADSA, the UK Whitaker Award for Excellence in Extension. 2020, she was awarded the Dairy Extension Award through the American Dairy Science Association for outstanding achievements in dairy extension. So just want to thank Donna, thank her there through the video, but thank her on behalf of us as specialists and on behalf of all of you guys, because a lot of what we're doing today is based on what Donna has done. Thanks, Donna. Okay, we'll jump into our first presentation. We've got 2 or 3 presentations this morning before we head out to the field. So I'm just going to give an overall introduction talking about the benefits of improved grazing. You'll notice I'm using the word here, improved grazing. Other times in this short presentation, I'll talk about rotational grazing. But improved grazing is probably a good word. We're talking about improving what you're doing, making modifications. You don't need to come up with some sophisticated system to say that I'm using improved grazing or rotational grazing. Grazing by livestock is pretty well the cheapest form of nutrients. So the more that animals are grazing, the more they're getting their feed from grass or legumes in the field, typically the more money that you're making. So just an example of that is a relative cost ratio. If we say grazed pasture is 100, if you're feeding hay, just on average, the cost would be 222% of that 100. Alfalfa hay would be a little less because you're not having to give it nitrogen. Silage, almost 300%. Pellets, dehy forages, 400%. Grains and concentrates, 300%. So if you're feeding grains and concentrates, then it's going to cost you about 3 times as much as grazing. And obviously that's why we're at a grazing school. A lot of your profitability is going to depend on the amount or cost of hay and how much hay you feed. Or another way to put it, if you're able to feed less hay, typically you're going to be making more money if you're getting more of that feed for your animals from pasture. So we're talking about optimizing grazing, using more of what we produce, not wasting it by overgrazing or undergrazing, use it at a higher quality stage, use it more days of the year. So I'm just going to go through a number of benefits of improved grazing. And I don't want to guarantee that every one of these things is going to happen, but these give you a feel for the types of things that you'll see in your operation if you're using improved grazing practices. So the first would be utilization. So a way to look at this, if you were continuously grazing, you turn your animals out now or a few weeks ago and you leave them out all summer long until the fall, a fair bit of the forage is going to be wasted. It's not going to be consumed. It's going to be overgrazed in areas and undergrazed in other areas. So we like to think about it as continuous grazing. You're getting 20 to 50% of what is available or potentially available in the animal. If you go to a 3 to 5 week rotation, moving animals every 3 weeks, you're increasing the utilization 40 to 60%. You go up to 3 to 7 day rotation, you're improving it even more, up to 70%. Every 2 days, similar. If you're moving animals every day, twice a day, you're getting 60, 70, 80% utilized what's going into animals. Now, you don't need to say, I'm going to move twice a day because I want to be right there if that doesn't make sense for you. If you've got an off-farm job and you're only able to move the cattle on weekends or the sheep on weekends, that's fine. But a dairy producer, obviously, they'll probably be moving animals twice a day just for the milking. So think about what works for your operation. Even hay is not 100% utilization because you have some waste in the baling, in the dry down process. You would have even more waste in the feeding. Green chop would mean cutting it green in the field and bringing it straight to the animal. That happens in a lot of countries in the world where they just have, small herds, 5 animals. Most of us aren't doing that, but even that you don't have 100% utilization. So we're trying to say, how can I improve utilization for what I currently have? Another benefit is yield, is actually production. So here's some research from 3 different states. This was the increase in gain per acre with rotational, meaning you're moving your animals, versus continuous grazing. 44% in Arkansas improvement, 37% in Georgia, and this is accumulation of studies from those different states, 35% in Oklahoma. Looking at carrying capacity, this is some research from Virginia Tech. Carrying capacity increased with rotational versus continuous grazing by 43%, meaning 43% more animals were carried or live weight was carried. Milk production was 40% higher. This was in a dairy system. What about the quality of the forage? The nutrition or the nutrients going into the animal. So when I'm talking about quality, you're controlling more what the animals consume if you're moving them from pasture to pasture rather than them letting select. Now, they can be very selective and get very high quality feed, but much better for you to have control over it and making sure that they have high quality feed. And we'll talk a fair bit over the next couple of days in looking at gains per acre or gains per animal. If you had 50 acres and 1 cow, she'd probably gain pretty well because she could eat anything she wanted to, but that wouldn't make any sense economically. So often we'd rather you think about gains per acre. What's your production? Not just do I have the most gain on individual animals. Extending the grazing season. We'll come at that from several different angles, from stockpiling fescue to bale grazing to other things. So most of the forage in Kentucky are cool season forages, like the orchard grass, fescue, bluegrass, white clover that you see up here. So cool season forages are growing best like right now. The peak of production is here April, May, June, drops typically in the summer, picks back up a little bit in the fall. Okay, when you've got animals that are on your farm year-round, what do? If you've got that cyclic production, and the animals, they need material all along. So if you can extend the grazing season, any way you can is typically going to be beneficial. We'll come back to that on a number of fronts as we move through the next couple of days. Stand persistence. Alfalfa we think about as a hay crop, but it can be a very high value grazing crop. But it's not going to last in the stand unless you give it a rest period, Cutting for hay, you're going to cut every 30 days or so. So grazing, you do a similar thing. With our native warm season grasses, they can be very productive, very resilient, very long-lived, but they need long rest periods. And so, again, they're not going to survive if you don't give rest periods of 30 to 40 days. Here's grazing in California on alfalfa hay fields. That's the main purpose of these fields, but because they have extra regrowth in the winter there in Southern California, they're getting a lot of production, a lot of animal production by leasing these out for grazing. Animal performance, what does that do? So again, the percent change of rotational versus continuous grazing. Carl Hovland is a well-known forage specialist in Georgia, passed away just a couple of years ago. This is research that he did over time. He got 38% higher stocking rate, 37% better calf gain per acre, 32% less hay fed per cow using rotational versus continuous grazing. Okay, what about animal health? I'm not going to stand here and tell you that your animals are going to be healthier just because you're rotational grazing, but there are ways that you're benefiting animal health, both by you looking at the animals more, both by the fact that you're not forcing them to graze the same thing, to graze material that might have parasites that they've deposited the week before, so you can improve animal health. We won't talk a whole lot about that, but feel free to ask questions about that as we go through. I think we'll have a little bit on that maybe tomorrow. The environment. You're improving the environment typically by having managed grazing. Animals standing in the pond, that's obviously not going to do much for water quality, both for what the animals are drinking, but by actually what's going downstream as well. But if you can do a managed grazing system, you can control exactly, making sure that they are drinking clean water, making sure that the environment is taken care of better. And the economics. And we don't want to stand up here today and just say this is a good thing to do, this is good to do for the environment, the plants do better and grow better. It's got to help your bottom line. So we've used this for a number of years, but it's still very relevant. Back about 30 years ago in Wisconsin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but dairy farmers started doing more grazing of their milking herd. And they weren't getting, starting grazing, they weren't getting more milk production per day, but they saw a higher net income per cow because of reduced feed cost, a lower investment per cow, an increase in net farm income, and isn't this what matters? So typically the milk production per day did drop because you weren't feeding them the exact thing they needed, the very high energy ration, but we're talking about cattle that are, dairy cattle that are living longer, you're getting better net income per farm. Okay, this is J.C. Winstead. I worked with him when I was at Virginia Tech, and Chris, you worked with him when you were there in Virginia. This is his farm, partly some bottomland or valley land in Hillside in Kentucky. J.C. came into this farm, and it looked like when he came into that, like the neighbor's farm on the right. He worked over time with rotational grazing, with brush management. You can see the contrast in improved grazing, and think about the carrying capacity that he has over what his neighbor has. Every day grazed is money saved. Now, that's not exactly true, because if you say, I want to graze 365 days a year, and the only way to do that is having that, 1 cow on 50 acres or 10 cows on 50 acres to make sure you have enough feed, that probably doesn't make sense. But if you can stretch out your grazing season, if you can reduce hay feeding from 120 days to 60 days, then you're likely going to be making more money. I want to highlight our forage website. So KY Forages, if you Google that, you'll get to the forage website. You see events. You can sign up for our monthly forage news. You've got a range of publications and other information. And this is what you'll see with events. For example, this meeting in Eastern Kentucky. I want to highlight, and Chris will probably comment on it, our KY Forages YouTube channel that Chris records presentations and manages this. So you go to this and you can see pretty well any of our major presentations that we've given over the last 6, 7 years, Chris, and some even earlier than that. I like to click on playlist because it's going to show each meeting individually. You can go back and listen with hay production. Someone talked about the Alfalfa and Stored Forage Conference that we had this past, or that was a year ago, but we recorded the one that we had in 2023 as well. Again, just Google KY Forages YouTube, or go to YouTube and say KY Forages. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to thank you for that work because I really enjoy that website.
Great.
We do too. We watched all those videos. We've learned a lot from
Neat, neat. Chris has commented before that his wife goes, do people really watch those videos? So thank you, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Well, when I say utilization, I'm talking about what you've got in the field versus what the animal consumes. And we'll talk a lot this afternoon. You don't want to graze it into the ground. You don't want to utilize 100%. But when I'm giving those numbers there, I'm talking about leaving some residue, and then we'd like for all of this to go into the animal and not be trampled, not be wasted, not be overgrown. Yeah. Yeah. The long and the short of it. Yeah. Good question.